Welcome back to our five-part series on technology for business owners, where we break down the systems, decisions, and risks that every leader faces, but rarely gets explained in plain language. In episode 1, we talked about how technology actually works inside a business, the people, the processes, the systems, and the connectivity that ties everything together. Today, we're taking the next step, how to execute tech projects without getting burned. Because every owner has lived this, a project that took too long, cost too much, didn't deliver what was promised. And the truth is, most of those failures are preventable. I'm joined again by Chad Cook, who spent his career building, rescuing, and leading technology projects across industries. Chad, it's great to have you back.
Toby, pleasure to be here again. Thank you.
Chad, let's start with something we hear all the time. Why is this taking so long? Why is this costing so much? Why does the final product not match what we asked for? And from your experience, what's the biggest misunderstanding owners have about how tech projects actually work?
Sure. Yeah, I think with this, there's the piece that we talked about in the first episode about strategy versus utility. And with a lot of technology projects, people look at them as, kind of simple and transactional, right? I want X, and can we please go build X? And X is, in certain people's minds clearly defined, and therefore tends to be oversimplified. So what I've seen often is the engagement isn't there at the beginning. And that comes in two directions, right? So the technology organization or the offshore people or whoever it might be that's helping to build the project really has to engage with the business owners to understand what they're doing, to again relive that day in the life and make sense of it so they can get the nuances and the feel for what goes on. And the business owners also, I encourage people to think about this as an engagement model, right? Stay involved at the beginning and put that effort in to help the technology people understand what you do, how you do it, and how you think about the problem domain, because high-level descriptions often turn into a perspective or an interpreted result, right? So the less room for interpretation on the tech side, the easier it is to have a good outcome and to organize things in a way that executes.
Yeah, and the common thread there seems to, from last week's or last discussion and this discussion is communication is just so critical, and getting the information across is what tends to be where it jams up. One of the concepts that you talk about a lot is the difference between a product and a project, and how choosing the wrong model is one of the fastest ways to get burned. Can you break that down in simple terms?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a subtlety, right? Because most people think of them synonymously, project, a product, whatever it is, especially if you're an internal organization, not building like commercial products that are sold externally. But even within an organization, a project, you can think of it as the precursor to your product, right? So oftentimes it might be what looks to be a small thing, something you want to test out to see if it brings value, and then you want to live with it over a period of time. Or it's really narrow in scope and very concise, like we need this report or this thing to just happen, in some time frame. The difference that I think about is how long is this thing going to be there, right? I've seen this very often where non-tech people, business owners or whatnot, will reach out to the technology org and they'll ask them, hey, can you just whip up this thing for me? And every time I hear whip up anything, the flags go off, right? To start to listen and say, okay, well, do you expect this to be there for a long time? Because what tends to happen behaviorally is once someone builds something that they like, the person considers it to be production at that point. So the concept of, in some ways of doing development, you can prototype things and then you can, bring them, do the research, figure out what you need to do, and then turn it into a commercial product. That's common in product spaces where you're building things. But internally, what tends to happen is someone will whip something together and then the person relies on it every day. So therefore, it's no longer a prototype. It's no longer just a little utility. It's actually something that's part of their workflow. And so in that regard, the functionality that's required to keep something living and breathing and operationally working over time, that takes a little bit extra effort. So thinking about those questions ahead of time of, is this something that is going to be really critical to my workflow? Yes, probably. So we should spend a little extra time up front and say, what does that mean? Not just for the business owner, but also for the technology people, because they're the ones who have to maintain it, make sure it operates, make sure it runs every day, add new things to it, because that's the other pattern, right? Is that when someone finds something they like, then they start using it every day, that it's natural to say, okay, hey, can we put this other piece of functionality into it as well?
Yeah, I love that. Whip it up is a red flag. It's funny because um, it seems common sense or easy to deal with people who have whipped something up, but there's a lot of emotion attached to what they've created, and there's a lot of ego attached to what they've created. So sometimes trying to get them to move off of it or move in a direction that will solve the problem better can be challenging just from that perspective alone. Let's talk a little bit about scoping. Most owners aren't technical, and they shouldn't have to be, but they still need to define what they want to build. What's the simplest way for a non-technical leader to scope a project without getting lost in the weeds?
I think that comes back to this approach of really, what do I do in my daily life? And so if I think about how that works, right, there's a lot of intuition involved with what we operate on, regardless of our role. So sitting down with the technical person and thinking of this as again an engagement model. You're a partner to your technology team, and your team on the technology side is a partner to you. So really making sure that there's an engagement model as opposed to that transactional element of just, I want X, I'll write up a few bullets and I'll toss it over the wall, because technology is simple, right? And in some ways it can be simple, but there are underlying and implied functionality that comes along with the explicit functionality that people will ask for. So if someone comes in and asks for a feature, hey, I want a web page that lets me go in and generate a report and put in a couple values and then have some Excel file spit out from it, or just see it on the page with the graph, right? That sounds pretty simple. But if we think about the underlying infrastructure, well, you have a web server, you have APIs, you have logic that's going to happen, you have libraries to generate Excel, you have things that are going to talk network protocols. And so not to get in too much into the minutia of the technical underpinnings, but the implications of doing what sounds very simple inevitably have all these implied functionalities that are required to build to actually make that little thing work. So this understanding of the engagement and communication, that's where things often go awry, because the oversimplified, just produce a report on a web page for me, you should be able to do that because it sounds simple and everybody else does it, right? That's where, well, if you want to be thoughtful up front, it might be a one-off thing. Where is it run? Is it running on the developer's computer? I've seen that many times too, right? So instead, we need an infrastructure. This is something you'll use every day. Let's do it properly. Let's think a little bit ahead of making something that's not just functionally great, but also operationally efficient and sustainable.
Yeah, and trying to think of the word I'm trying to use here, but gives you the ability to be flexible with that in the future as well. It's not a fixed in stone route that you've taken, that you can't increase optionality or flexibility with things as things change, which in technology are changing constantly.
The business changes constantly too, right? So that's the other another theme around product, is thinking of this as a product like you'd expect upgrades, you would expect that it has to be maintained. Libraries, infrastructure components behind the scenes will inevitably have new versions. They might have security holes. So these are all the implicit things that technology people will manage, usually behind the scenes. So oftentimes when things look simple, it's because there's a whole set of experienced people on your team that are keeping it running and doing all this work that nobody really recognizes. So having some awareness of that when you sit and talk with your technology people and just get a basic understanding. You don't need to understand the particulars of the HTTPS protocol and REST APIs and things like that, but really say what's involved with this to make this a production-oriented thing that we can live with, sustain, is efficient for us to operate. And then that scoping becomes part of it. So it's the functionality that you're asking for, getting into the details of what's involved there, working with your technology person and the bridger, the person who can translate between, and then what are the implied functionalities that are required to actually make this thing exist, right? And that goes into a broader project that, you can see, do you have this already? What do you want to buy? What should you build? And that's a whole other realm of logic and analysis that can be discussed as well.
Yeah, I think some CTOs are going to be forwarding this to their CEOs in their companies and going, "See, I told you there's so much behind this. It's not just as simple as you think." As business owners, and we see tremendous content out there. We see tremendous programs out there, and so you just think, "Oh, it's been done. Like this is easy to do," or "That's a tremendous website," or "I like the functionality of that website." Whatever it might be, little things. There's a lot of different factors behind the scenes that have huge implications in the mid and long term if you don't address them up front. And that comes to our next point, really, because you brought into a lot of turnaround situations, projects that were failing, over budget, completely off the rails. Can you share a story where a project looked doomed, but a few key changes you were able to do was able to turn it around?
Sure, yeah. So I'll go back a little bit to building some security technology, some cybersecurity analytic tools and technologies. And this began coming back to that simple and transactional. The mandate was pretty straightforward, to build something that would basically analyze some security data, some input from other tools and whatnot, to then give an overall assessment of enterprise risk. So it sounded pretty straightforward. At the nuances are in there, but what was going on is that people often didn't know where to start, and so as a result, they looked at all the dependent pieces that were needed, these inputs and these other things, and they started to reinvent the wheel on those things instead of understanding where the value proposition was. So this comes back to whether you're building commercial products that are sold or internal products, it still points at that understanding of what is the business value that we're trying to achieve, not just the technical value. And so without understanding the business value, which gives you kind of like a pointer towards the highest return on investment, and that's usually where you should start the functionality of what you're building, people will often say, well, I know I need these other dependent things, and they'll go build that, which might either be buying it or reinventing it or otherwise. And you spend a lot of time wasted building the surrounding components without adding the actual functional value that you're trying to go after in the first place.
Chad, let's talk about efficiency. Where do businesses waste the most time, money, and effort during tech projects, and how do you suggest they can avoid it?
Here, right, it's this element of coming back to that first theme of simplified and transactional. It's really the pressure, I think, to get something going, right? People want things to be done quickly, and they can be done quickly, but there's a difference between fast and messy and efficient, right? So efficiency talks about really the ability to execute everything that's needed, understand what's needed, and do that as quickly as is necessary, as opposed to just go write code, right? And that's what I hear a lot with people in terms of just when is it going to be done, and can you just start writing code? And it sounds like, yes, the code has to be written, but that upfront understanding of the business value that they're trying to achieve, those interactions are key, and the engagement, right? So this, again, really harping on this theme of the engagement model, the business sponsor who's asking for whatever that technology product, service, or offering is, they have to really be comfortable with the idea that it's a partnership, and you have to sit down and really just spend a little extra time explaining your day in the life, what you do, how your stuff works, and how you need this new thing to work, because then the developer or the team that's building it, whether it's infrastructure or software, can actually execute on something a little more material and get things moving. Where things end up getting wasted from a time perspective is high-level description of, hey, we're trying to achieve this thing, and thinking about or recognizing that we know about all these like components and infrastructure things. We have to build servers, we have to put some software on or whatever, and just going to right to task without organizing and overlaying the return on investment focused with the business value of what functionality is trying to be brought to the table and how that's going to help people. That leads to sort of scope creep, which then is another one that will impact how efficiently you are executing on things and how long things take.
Yeah, I think the construction industry, a lot of big companies have moved to reverse planning. So start with, the completed house and work backwards, or building and work backwards. I think what I'm hearing you say is that it's a little bit similar with software is what's the outcome? What's the ultimate outcome that needs to be achieved or that's desired? And then how do we work back from that to solve the problem? And I'm
It's peeling
I'm
the onion,
oversimplifying it, but yeah.
and peeling the onion, right, of understanding. And so you have the aspect of user stories, right? So that's what I focus on oftentimes. Not in some firms, some agile shops or whatnot will focus on actual phases called user story creation. Not being so technical with other business sponsors, it's really just sit down again, tell me what you do, how it works, and tell me it in a different way. So one of the questions that I ask is often for people to differentiate between what they want it to do and how they want it to do it. Because most people, especially when talking with tech people, they'll often just frame it in a very concrete way of, this is what goes on, this is how I do this thing. And I'll often push a little bit and step back and say, explain to me what it is you're trying to do without telling me how, right? Because once people can reframe their explanation, then that enables me to say, okay, well, your current process is X, and that's really a side effect of the tools and technologies you're using today. But this new technology offers you a different approach, and we can accomplish the same thing that you're trying to do, the what, in this new way, which actually takes less time, easier to implement, easier to maintain. Does that sound like a good fit?
Yeah, that makes sense. I could see how why could be a valuable question in all of this, right? Why do you want that outcome? Why is that an issue? And that would help get into the, what problem are you trying to solve? And finally, for the owners that are watching, what does good execution actually look like, and what should they expect from a well-run project?
I would say at first it's again the engagement of upfront being able to clarify and ask questions on both directions for the technology folks helping you and the business owners that have the subject matter expertise that they're trying to provide some guidance on, but also clarity of scope and iterative process, right? So if we think about it coming back to what's the highest business problem that's being solved, the highest priority, the most return on investment, or the biggest bang for the buck, whatever phrase you want to use for it, where will they see the most immediate impact? How do we get to that component first, or some piece of that, so they can start to see the value, because that's what helps to build momentum. And then from there, if you have that business value identified, you can focus on what's going to give some piece of it, if not the whole thing, depending on the size of the project. Get to that part first so they can start to engage with it and start to use it, because then that makes all of the subsequent pieces that have to get done effectively prioritized, because as a result of showing some value early, they can give feedback on it, which will transmit into changing, or updating how you think about the other features. It may actually even change features, right? So the iterative part, really having clarity of scope and sticking with that scope too, because scope creep is another thing where oftentimes I've seen this in a lot of places that I've worked, where first features are these, and this is what we're going to build. And then they start to look at it and they say, but I also thought about these 5 other things. And development teams or the infrastructure teams will ask, well, when do you want those done? Because time is, boxed here. Well, we want all of it, right? And the deadlines don't shift. So really being clear on understanding scope, understanding and communicating what's involved with the implied and the clear functionality to make those things happen, and then recognizing that it's an iterative thing. And as long as you're adopting your priorities for return on investment and business value with each iteration, then things start to progress in a nice way.
Chad, great insights as always. Thank you for coming back for episode 2 of our 5-part series on technology for business owners.
Thank you for having me, and I hope everybody's finding some value in what we're providing here.
I think so. This episode is really going to save people a lot of pain, which pain is money. And next time, we're going to dive deeper into the CEO's real job in technology, aligning tech with business. So if you want help scoping, planning, or rescuing a project, reach out to us anytime. This episode is sponsored by Hyperion Business Solutions. If you want systems that work, teams that align, and projects that actually deliver, follow us or reach out for a conversation.